This is the sound of one voice. This is the sound of one voice.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Piper Hendricks. I'm the CEO of Stories Change Power, and I'm so glad that you're here. If you've joined us before, you know that our speaker chooses a song to welcome you, and I so appreciate Dr. Ralph picking something that's just so peaceful, and it's so perfect as we're talking about belonging today. I'll introduce Allison in just a moment. First, I want to share that Stories Change Power supports people who want to make a difference in their neighborhoods, communities, and country. We do that through workshops, learning communities, one-on-one coaching, as well as short courses like a 4-week storytelling course that we're offering Wednesdays in May. We will cover all the basics of storytelling for positive change, and there's still a few spots open, so register soon. We would love to see you there. You'll find more about all of our offerings on our website, and be sure that you're following us on LinkedIn for our latest resources and updates. Before we turn to today's topic, I want to thank Clae for recognizing the importance of belonging and sponsoring today's talk. If you're looking for a partner to support developing strategy or implementation for social good, you need to connect with Clae's team. They design unique engagements to support at various levels, from individual leadership coaching to organizational development and global outreach and advocacy campaigns. If you'd like to help keep this series free for everyone, we would love to hear from you. A few quick reminders before we jump into the talk today. Our chat is open for constructive conversations among our human friends only. AI is welcome to watch our recording, and the chat is not included in the recording, so we will share that early next week. Feel free to chat in the chat. That will not be part of what we share on YouTube next week. Any questions that you have, please put those in the Q&A. You should see a little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. In answering those, we may mention your first name, but we will not identify you by your full name. And you can also opt to be anonymous in those questions if you prefer. And if we can't reach your questions today, and I anticipate we'll have many because we are covering some really heady topics, we will answer those in an upcoming newsletter or LinkedIn. We have captions available, so please use those if they are helpful to you. And as a webinar, your mic is off, your camera is off. Please do what you need to do to be fully present and take good care of yourself as we address some big topics. Today, we are talking about creating belonging in a fragmented world. We'll focus on ways we think about community and belonging and how values, goals, and language fit into a world that works for all of us, no exceptions. I am delighted to introduce Dr. Allison K. Ralph, a leader in religious pluralism and social cohesion, to speak with us today. Allison brings 20 years of experience in strategy, research, and nonprofit and philanthropic leadership to her work at Cohesion Strategies. She previously worked at the Aspen Institute Religion and Society program, where she served as an associate and interim director, and also its director of Religion and Philanthropy Initiative. Allison also managed events at the Al-Hebri Foundation and the Catholic University of America. She earned her PhD in church history from the Catholic University of America and an MPhil from Cambridge University. Her graduate research focused on how societies manage or fail to manage their internal diversity and how they create and maintain social boundaries. I first heard Allison speak about the way many organizations misunderstand the notion of values last December, and I knew immediately that I wanted to bring her on the webinar series to share with you and how this may impact your own personal understanding as well as the way we operate in organizations. So welcome, Allison. I am so glad you're here with us today.
Thanks.
Before we, sorry, good.
Glad to see you.
Before we dive in, it's always helpful for us to know who is joining us today. There will be a poll that pops up in just a moment. We have 3 questions for you, so get ready to enter those on your screen or in the chat if that is easier. First, we'd like to know, how long have you worked in advocacy? And you'll see several options there, ranging from I'm new here, if you've been in advocacy less than 2 years, all the way up to being a pro, or maybe you're not in advocacy and you work in a different field. As always, our webinars are welcome to everyone. Second question, and this is a bit of a pop quiz. There is a right answer in there, and Allison will let us know, but do not be afraid. Take your best guess. The social body, what is it? Is it a role that an introvert plays in public? Is it collective consciousness, any group community, expectations of how my body should look and move in public? And on that one, it's multiple choice. So if you think it's all of the above, that is an option too. And then lastly, we have a question for folks working in organizations, and define that broadly. That may be a religious organization you're with. It may be one that's your professional job. It could be anything and everything. But do you know how to decide between promoting one value or over another? If you have to decide between them, do you have a way to do that? Is there clarity? So I'm seeing some responses coming in. Go ahead and pop those into the poll, please. And again, if it's easier to put those into the chat, that's a-okay too. We'll give folks a few more seconds. I see good participation and a lot of, that number just keeps going up and up. So we'll give folks a few more seconds. Maybe in 3, 2, and 1. Let's go ahead and close the poll, and I'll share the results with you. So Allison, we've got, it looks like a good number of folks who are new, and then also many folks who are in a field other than advocacy. So really helpful to know that. Great to have you here. About 70% of folks are saying that the social body is collective consciousness. About half saying any group or community, and then a few votes elsewhere. And then about half of folks are neutral when it comes to deciding between one value over another. And then about a quarter and a quarter or so agree and disagree. So a good amount of variety, a lot to learn today. So we'll stop sharing that poll. And Allison, we'll turn over to you to hear today's discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Piper. It's so good to be here. Piper asked me when we first met, she asked me to sort of connect to create a through line for what I've been feeling in my gut when I look out into the world these days. So this is the first time I've tried to connect that through line for you all. I'm really excited about it. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. So again, I'm Allison Ralph. I run Cohesion Strategy. As Piper said, that's a consultancy that supports nonprofits and funders in developing and implementing pluralistic solutions. I want to talk a little bit about my bird theme. A group of starlings, and it's a photo of a group of starlings, is called a murmuration, but it feels to me like a great metaphor for community, because that murmuration and a community sticks together when each member finds more joy in it than sorrow. And creating that dynamic is collective work. So that's a little bit about my theme and sort of how I think about community and community belonging. I got into that because I'm a history nerd. I got a doctorate in early Christian history, and as Piper said, my grad work focused on how early Christian societies used certain kinds of metaphors of community belonging as they managed their internal diversity. Frankly, about how to shape the good society, and they're trying to figure out what that should look like and what the divine instructions are. Another way to say that is, how did they handle fights over heresy and orthodoxy? After I finished that work, I went on to help build on the religion and society program at the Aspen Institute, where we were promoting American religious pluralism. That is, again, we were trying to help our American society manage its internal diversity around how to shape that good society. And in doing that work, I often encountered mission-driven funders and grantees who really struggled with two separate, but I think related aspects of how they understood their work to create that common good. And the first was a strategic problem. How do you work best in a society in which not everyone shares the same vision of the common good? And then second, a moral problem. What do you do when your internal values offer conflicting solutions to how you should move forward in that work to create the common good? So as I said, I'm going to try to create a through line here, tie all these things together by walking through metaphors of community belonging, specifically the social body, which thank you for your answers on that. It's great. They're basically all right. second, the competing definitions of the good society, and finally, you'll get into the how this affects nonprofit life with values, goals, and values conflict. I'm going to start with the historical stuff around metaphors of community belonging, and then I'm going to back out and into what it means for nonprofits and advocates today. So part one, belonging. Humans are really social critters. We just have a fundamental basic need to belong. And since no two humans are exactly the same, there's always some level of internal dissent about how any group should be formed or should work. That means we just have this perennial problem of figuring out who we are, who's in our group, who's out, why, and what to do about it. One of the oldest and most common ways that humans define their we is by using the metaphor of the social body. And the way I think of it is when we describe a group of people in terms of a single physical body, although folks do use this term in other ways, like the fourth option was how a body should be presented in public. So that is also a way that folks think about social body or community consciousness. Those two are very related, actually. But this metaphor is thousands of years old. It's, I think, the most powerful metaphor for belonging in the human lexicon. For all you communicators out there, I encourage you to train yourself to recognize and even use this set of metaphors. But I will say, be careful with it, because these metaphors are very powerful for inclusion and belonging, but they are also really powerful metaphors for harm, control, and exclusion. So use them with caution. But what are they, actually? Well, as I said, these things are thousands of years old. They've been used across the world in many different cultures. The Greeks and Romans, they show up in ancient Hindu texts, especially in the Rig Veda. The Prophet Muhammad used these metaphors, and Paul of Tarsus also used this language of the social body. And we still use some of these phrases in our day-to-day life, and they still affect how we think of a group. So I happen to know most about the Western traditions, but these ideas, as I said, are just super common across the globe. So I'm betting that you've heard of the phrase head of state, but I wonder if you've ever stopped to think about what that means, head of state. Well, the Greeks use that phrase head of state to mean the literal physical head, the head of the political body, head of the group of people in a city or a polis. Here's Julius Caesar, actually the head of the Roman Empire in the first century. Paul of Tarsus, of course, used the phrase the body of Christ to describe not just the communion bread, but also the living, breathing, and growing community of believers. This is a representation from a modern fellowship showing individuals making up the cross of Christ. If you've ever heard someone like bemoan a politician or some other set of people as a cancer on our society, or say those people are a disease, then you have heard the social body metaphor in action, used as a tool of exclusion. You also see it in action just in our words member and membership, referring to being formally connected to a larger group. And those words come from the Latin word membrum, which means literally a limb or a piece of the whole body. So the social body is a way of describing us, and this language is so old and so deeply embedded in our way of speaking that it sort of metaphors shape the way that the structures that you sort of populate your imagined universe with. So the fact that we speak in this language without even realizing it means that this language is shaping how we think about our society without us even noticing it. Here's a couple of other examples of the social body representations. We've got Hobbes' Leviathan. That's a representation of the state embodied as a king composed of his people. And then, of course, we've got Ben Franklin's representation of the American colonies cut apart from each other and thus dead. All representations of a single physical body connected, created out of individuals. So today, our society is largely individualistic, But for the ancients, individuals were always parts of the group first. The group is the primary identity. Scholars argue over whether ancients even had a sense of self. So we really think about ourselves differently. And they consistently use this language of the connective tissue of the social body. A couple of examples. So 300 years before Christ, the Greek philosopher Aristotle famously said that only gods and beasts delight in being alone, meaning that to be without community, to be outside of community, is literally to not be human. A good 500 years later, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius echoed the same sentiment, saying, "Thou hast seen a hand cut off, or a foot, or a head severed from the trunk and lying at some distance from the rest of the body. Just so does the man treat himself who severs himself from mankind or acts unsocially." So the ancients here are really articulating this deep, pervasive human need for belonging in society. Now, of course, we have a ton of social and psychological research about this need. Like, for example, we know that the loneliness epidemic in America is causing many tens of thousands of Americans to attempt or commit suicide. It's really terrible. People, when they feel disconnected from community, are acting on that by removing themselves from human existence. So again, to paraphrase, Marcus Aurelius here, it is your connection to society that makes you human. I think that's super, super profound. And the way that the ancients are talking about the social body stuff really just expresses that pervasive human need for belonging. And they're aware too of the tensions between the group and the individual. And so none of this means that the individuals don't matter. Without individuals, there's no group, right? And a ton of rhetorical and political effort was and still is aimed at keeping individuals in the group and in the corporate body. In large part because that corporate body is a single unit and is trying to move in a single way, in a single direction. So that means that that is why humans' moral and theological differences make arguments over what is the good society also arguments over who's in, who's out, why, and what to do about it. Let me tie that again together without the metaphor thing. To say that every community is navigating competing definitions of the common good and trying to understand who's in or out. So it's an innate, those questions are innately connected for us as humans. And there's also a concurrent tension there between getting the society right and cutting out so many imperfect people that you have no society or very brittle society. So it's also true that every time you exclude someone, they feel it, are hurt, and may react by trying to aggressively overpower you. I think we've all had the experience of being disinvited from a party we didn't want to go to. Somehow this still hurts my feelings. I don't know why, but it's true. The same thing is true when we disinvite each other, actively cut each other out. That's why conflicts about heresy and orthodoxy were so vitriolic and violent. And that is also why polarized politics today sometimes becomes violent. So I'm saying all of this to make visible some of the tensions that mission-driven nonprofits are navigating as you all out there are also trying to contribute to the common good. You're defining the common good and trying to contribute to it and to live out your values all at the same time. So I'm going to stop screen share for the moment, and I would love to hear from you all with any questions or comments you might have about the social body through history, or if you are noticing it now.
Thank you, Allison. I welcome folks either in the Q&A or in the chat. I am just marveling. Ever since you taught me the word murmuration, I can't see birds the same. And it was really remarkable. The December when we met in a big group in person, literally right over the White House, walking down to our next gathering, and there's a huge murmuration of birds, and it's amazing. And I hope folks will have an opportunity to see something like this soon, and you'll see it differently, where it just looks and like a school of fish as well. It just looks like they're moving as one body so
Yeah.
easily that you can forget each individual one in there is following, is changing or leading, all the way they're moving together. And so I appreciate, I feel like you kind of lift this veil and we see like, oh, all these words that we're using, all these expressions without really thinking about why. And you mentioned how that the metaphor can be used for, there can be good in it and there can be harm or control. Can you elaborate a bit more on the difference and the impact?
Sure, absolutely. Um, there are we've heard this language so much that sometimes it's just making it visible. So um, if you are a Christian yourself, or you're in the Christian tradition or familiar with the Christian tradition, you would recognize the Pauline discussion of Christ as the Christian community as the body of Christ, and he means the community of all believers. And that's really powerful. It's also why the communion is communion. It means together with. That's what that means. And so the metaphor of taking the bread and eating the bread and physically becoming part of a single united body that is united across time and space in this one community, that's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly powerful. There are many other, I actually saw, I happened across a Native American treaty with the federal government that's from the 18th century, and it was a representation of multiple tribes speaking with one heart. And they had drawn all of the symbols for each tribe together, and then sort of connected all of their hearts into one, saying, "We are one body, we agree." Right? You sort of start to see this underlying metaphor. The word unanimity means with one spirit. That's
Yeah.
what it means.
Well, and it's fun. I can't believe I'm just making this connection, but there's a documentary out and it's called Join or Die. And it just clicked the
Yeah,
picture.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
yes, I probably should
yeah,
have. But if folks haven't seen it, I think it's looking back 20 years since Robert Putnam published Bowling Alone,
yeah,
and thinking about how as a society we are so individualistic now and how people are not joining. And I
yeah,
hope this isn't true of folks on the call or on the webinar today, but we're not in, whether it's religious community or volunteering clubs or ways of being connected and thinking about the impact that can have. And we have a great comment here from Ginger. She says another metaphor I heard this week was a group of geese flying in a V. I can picture that. When the lead gets tired, he or she goes to the back, another goose takes over the lead. If one falls out of formation, two geese will go and check on that goose, and then they stay in formation to draft each other so they can go farther. That is beautiful. Thank you for sharing, Ginger. And I'm curious, Allison, how that lands with you, and if there's more metaphors in
yeah.
in how we are as humans.
Totally. Yeah, there are a couple of different main ways that the metaphor of the body shows up. There's sort of almost cosmological structures, basically, that inform the kind of imaginary understanding of what the structure of the social body is. One of them is very hierarchical, and the other one is very flat and very sort of communitarian. Um, but they each sort of have their pros and cons, you might say, about how you organize a community. Paul's understanding of the community, the social body, was very flat, frankly. Roman society was a very hierarchical place. And Paul, of course, says, in Christ there is no slave or free. There is no male or female, right? There's he sort of collapses all of these hierarchies of the Roman society into, no, it's just us and we're just people, and which is incredibly freeing. I'm sure felt incredibly freeing to his community at that time. But when social bodies tend to be very flat like that, they also the way they tend to control their community boundaries is by basically keeping purity, really tight control of purity. And that can look like anything. It can be anything. It can be race or creed, or it can be behavior, or it can be, do you have green eyes or not? In anything at all. And if you sort of violate that boundary, it's not just violated as an individual, it's violated as a whole community. And so that creates communities that are really sort of divisive and vociferous. They're always breaking up into little pieces because they're saying, oh, you violated that. And I'm not going to be with you because you're contaminating me and my community. So, that can be really hurtful and be really destructive to a community, which is just trying to keep itself together. And when it feels threatened by impurities or contamination, the ancients used to say gangrene or cancer in a society. Well, what do you do with a gangrenous limb, man? You cut that thing off because it's going to kill the rest of the body.
Yeah. No, and I'm seeing a comment here about asking if this is spreading the influence of Christianity. I'm not sure if I fully follow the comment. It's I think right now we're using this as an example of many examples in all your religious studies of the social body and how we use that term without focusing. We're not meaning to highlight a particular religion and certainly not uplift or discriminate here. I think it's more of like one example of many of how we use this. And I think that historical, just knowing that this all is leading up to where we are today. I think a lot of the common terminology now is us versus them, or the in or out. So really appreciate the background, Allison, and to move into like, okay, so now that we're kind of in the same mindset, recognizing this is not a new concept, what does this mean for us today?
Yeah, sure. And I'll give one other example of this in another culture that thinks about it very differently. Eastern orientations of the sort of cosmology are very much about hierarchy and harmony. And so you hear this harmony language, harmony in Confucian texts, for example. And it's very much about duty and doing the right thing and performing your role in society. And that can be very supportive, but it also can be very constraining. And if you're not willing to do your function, then you can also be cut out in society. So again, this is global and shows up in many, many, many different ways and forms. So it's not just Christian. I happen to know most about the Christian tradition, so I use it. But it's very, very common.
All in the struggle. How do we define it? So
okay, so yeah, let me get back into the screen share.
Sounds good. And as folks have questions, please continue conversation in the chat. Very welcome. All the questions in the Q&A, very welcome.
Awesome. So okay, so yeah, I brought in some old, but I'm hoping this is kind of familiar language. Like you're like, oh yeah, so it sounds like I've heard that before. I brought this language in to illuminate two current struggles I think that individuals and organizations and groups face, and that I want to dig into that first one, that every community is navigating competing definitions of the good society. So while I'm speaking about this part, I'd love for you to write down in the comments what, if anything, in the historical stuff resonates about the tensions you might be feeling now in your own prophet work or in our society at large. So yeah, I'll start with the historical stuff again and then back out. My research on early Christianity focused on heresy and orthodoxy and how Christians came to justify violence over these differences. And that violence was ranged from social exclusion, simple exclusion, to political exile, to physical war. When I first went into it, I was like, oh, there's these terrible humans. And then once I started understanding the context, I realized that the justification of violence started because dedicated and genuine believers in the first few hundred years after the death of Christ had very different understandings of what they believed God wanted the good society to look like, and very different understandings of how Christians were supposed to live in this Roman pagan, totally not non-Christian world in those first few centuries. So a little bit of context. Roman Empire was huge, stretching from Britain through over to Persia, essentially in northern Africa. It's an incredible swath of territory. It included insanely diverse cultures, religiously, culturally, linguistically diverse cultures across that space. And you had these little Christians who were sort of in these tiny little communities all spread across that empire, all having sort of varying degrees of connection with each other or cultural similarity or difference. Again, they really wanted to follow divine instructions. But, also humans are, some of us are power hungry, and we have these different values and personalities, and we're constantly failing. All of that combined with the fact that there was no distinct biblical canon, that is the set of books that, you take a Bible off the shelf today and you sort of expect the certain set of books in there from Genesis through Revelation. They didn't have that until around the year 400. So the first sort of 300 years plus after, some years after Christ's death, these communities might have some, but not all of those books. They might also be reading as scripture some books that did not get included in the canon and are currently regarded as heretical. So of course they all came to totally different conclusions. So they just as inevitably accused each other of heresy. And as soon as you do that, as soon as you accuse each other of heresy, they started using the language of cutting each other off, literally using the language of amputation. I talked about gangrene and amputation, and that is exactly the language they were using. In fact, here is Augustine of Hippo arguing with the Donatists, what became one of the most vitriolic conflicts of the 3rd and 4th century. These issues were really deeply felt. The communities were sometimes living through periods of actual persecution. The persecution did not last straight through. It was not constant, but there were periods where they might actually be whipped. This is Erasmus being whipped in front of Diocletian, or, eaten by lions for entertainment. So the stress levels could be high. Public riots and even vicious guerrilla warfare were not uncommon outgrowths of these pressures through the 200s and 300s, which is the period that I studied the most. In the 4th century, when the Roman Emperor Constantine had some kind of conversion experience around 310, now the empire itself gets involved in these disagreements, because of course the emperor wanted his people to live peaceably, and he wanted God to bless the empire. And these bishops are sort of squabbling about what they're supposed to be doing. So he calls the Council of Nicaea. They gather in 325. And the emperor then enforces those bishops' decisions by exiling those that the council labeled heretics. So that's where we've moved from simple social exclusion to political exile. By the late 4th and early 5th centuries, you've got imperial soldiers smashing heads of religious dissidents in an effort to quell public dissent and to get the theology right for the survival of the empire. This last one that I put up is actually it's an image of the Albigensian Crusade, in which the French government killed off some thousands of Catharis in the Languedoc region. But that's how we move through from folks who are really just genuinely trying to create the good society to really terrible violence. This Donatist conflict that's in the upper left here, with Augustine arguing with the Donatists, there was literal guerrilla warfare where folks were throwing acid at each other's priests, locking the doors of their opposing churches and setting them on fire. This was truly terrible, horrendous local warfare about heresy. So I'd give all of that background to say that the instinct to connect the definition of the good society with that border enforcement around who's in and who's out, which is what all of this is, all of these photos that or the images that I'm showing, this is border enforcement. This is the resulting emotional and often physical violence that comes from that instinct to connect the good society with the who's in, who's out. With the troubles, do you mean the troubles in Ireland? Yeah. Yes, this is the definition. How do you define your we? Who's your we? What's your society? What is the good version of it? And folks in Northern Ireland had really different visions of that. And it ended, well, it ended peaceably, but there was a terrible violent period. Yeah. Okay, so, you know, I'm curious whether any of this is resonating.
And I'm eager to get into so how do we apply some of this
Yeah,
now in our advocacy? I do want to comment though, it just really, and I don't mean to make light of anything, but it feels like the difference between being, shut down on social media versus eaten by a lion. It I just feel like I have a little bit more perspective and gratitude that where, in the bigger course of history, things can feel really divided. We use many different words, divided, polarized, the exclusion now. And I don't want to underestimate by any stretch the impact of isolation, all the anger and fear many folks are feeling. But I think I just might feel a little grateful today that we're no longer, literally being eaten by lions.
totally. No, absolutely. But I will say that it's not that we can't go back there, which is a part.
Oops. I'm not sure if, let's see.
Or to kind of shut people out instead of figuring out how to navigate internal diversity. That worried me. That was the gut check for me of like, oh, I recognize where.
I think we may be, it's not a zero chance that there's a freezing on my end. But curious if you can let me know in the chat if Allison is frozen on your end as well. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you all. Okay. We will give Allison a moment to, oh, here. Okay,
Am I
Allison, we
back?
lost you for a moment. Okay.
Okay.
Good deal. If we need to, we can switch over to audio only. But
Okay.
I think we've got you back. And I'm sorry to have
Awesome.
missed, maybe can you
Sure. Yeah,
summarize
I'm sort of
this?
pieced out for a second. I think, what I was saying is that yes, heresy is alive and well today. And not just in the religious sense. But in the how do we define our societies differently? And yeah, it's still my worries. A big part of why I do my work is that I worry that the sort of excommunication that we see in our society broadly can and does actually turn into this increasing levels of community. It's called purification. That's a social scientific term for it. And then physical, not just emotional, but physical violence against other folks. So, yeah, that's what maybe we'll see if we'll try the screen share again and see if that works. If I freeze, let me know.
Sounds
Okay.
good. Jump back in.
So here's the situation now as the way I see it. Again, we have extremely diverse groups, religiously, culturally, ideologically diverse groups who are all trying to create the best society. I think mostly genuinely based on their very different theologies and morals. Some of us are power hungry, absolutely true. And every single one of us fails in some way. The stakes are really high. The stakes feel really high, and it is existential for some of us. Our tools are different. We vote now, but the struggle is the same. And you can see excommunication, ideological excommunication on both ends of the ideological spectrum. On the right, for example, Russell Moore and David French were exiled from the Southern Baptist Convention and the Republican Party, despite being theological conservatives. On the left, some progressives cut ties over stances on the Middle East, racial justice, gender, or abortion, or other things. These are today's orthodoxies and heresies, and I see the comment about worried about litmus tests on the left, and this is what's happening. There's an orthodoxy developing, or has been. So I think it's simplistic to say that there's two sides. Actually, I think it's much more multifaceted, but I will say that each side believes the others define the best society wrongly and immorally. And again, there's a real tension about getting society right, and making it so perfect that most people are excluded, leaving it small or brittle. So I'm finally going to get into that first strategic question for nonprofits of how do you navigate competing definitions of the good society most effectively? In the context of mission-driven nonprofit work, I think the most effective ways of being in the long run is to develop a positive vision that includes as wide a swath of our political body as possible. That is because policy changes are most long-lasting when they have multi-party support, and as the left has been saying for so long, policies and other outcomes tend to be better with broader, more diverse community input. So if you're running a nonprofit, you want your community that supports you to be as diverse, including as ideologically diverse as possible, in my view. So that would mean that the vision, strategies, and communications need to be pluralistic too. That they should engage a wide diversity of viewpoints fairly and promote a healthy conflict resolution process. So I think the best way to do that is to work on one issue or a very narrow set of issue areas at a time. So I've given a couple of examples here. So there are a few folks, I know some liberal Catholics, that would fall into all three of these: supporting climate change, work on to slow climate change, supporting LGBTQ folks, and right to life. So sort of a classic liberal Catholic set of issues. But if you were to tie all three of those issue areas together, there wouldn't be that many people who are going to agree to all three of those issues. However, you can, if you separate them one by one, each issue area can build a bigger, broader, more diverse community that can advocate more successfully, I think, for better and more long-lasting policy. So for a climate change organization, you have your base. They're always going to be, that's the main thing that they care about. There's also folks that you can tag onto that who are there because they're interested in justice issues. And then there's people you can tag onto that because they come at that from a right to life standpoint, because this is God's creation. Or they believe that it is God's creation, and pollution kills kids, right? That is certainly a coalition that you can assemble, but you can't assemble that coalition. You may have less, that coalition is going to be more narrow if you also add LGBTQ rights into that statement. So again, for LGBTQ folks, it's the most effective strategy is going to be to start with your base. Add, for example, conservatives, the millions of American conservatives who have LGBTQ folks that they love and want to support in their families and their lives. And then you would probably add folks who are supporters of classical liberalism there, who are interested in individual rights. Same thing for right to life, on a similar trajectory for right to life. You have your folks who are going to be in that space no matter what. Then you have your right to life leaning Democrats. About 25% of Democrats, I heard this a while ago, lean right to life. That is a big chunk of Democrats that is sort of kind of becomes disappeared in that party platform. And then I think there's a ton of folks who are uncomfortable with the way the folks the farthest left understand understand abortion and abortion access. And so you may, again, be able to build a more diverse and more effective coalition on that issue. So I don't, this is not about creating like an endless and boundless we. I don't think you have to speak to everyone, but you should be speaking to everyone who does care about what you care about, even when you disagree on other issues. And that does not mean that you're abandoning those other issues. It's that you allow each of those issues to build their own diverse coalitions. And I think that's super powerful. And for me, that's why pluralistic decision-making and coalition building isn't about compromise or about reducing the things or like, giving up what you believe about, what you believe in. It's about lasting policy and other outcomes that really serve people best and protect the most vulnerable. And I'll ask the Stories Change Power team to drop in a paper I wrote about this. Thank you. This is on the Foundation Review. Again, this is about multi-faith organizations, this paper that we put in there, but it gives an example of how diverse coalitions can be successful on by picking their issues. Okay, so then I want to go on to the values and goals conflict stuff. I suspect I can almost hear the sort of but what abouts or maybe the rising blood pressure from some folks as I'm saying these things, because I know that I'm challenging some orthodoxies about community and political organizing right now. I know that I am. You might be saying to yourself or having an emotional response of, I can't work with them, whoever them is in your world, because they believe XYZ thing and that violates my values. I get that. I have those feelings myself all the time. And I'm going to go back to the thing about social body that I just walked us through, which is that though humans have this urge to tie the definition of the good society to border enforcement of who's in and out, also, we have to also know that doing so almost inevitably leads to some level of emotional and then physical violence. Again, there's this innate tension there between getting the society right, that's our goals, nonprofit goals and missions, and cutting out so many imperfect people that you have no society left, or a very small coalition, or a very, very brittle coalition. So, and again, every time you exclude someone, they feel it, and that creates a reaction. So that brings us to the moral problem, that second problem. The what do you do when your internal value sets or your own orthodoxy offers conflicting solutions to a problem? So the statement, but I'm not going to abandon the other things that I care about. And like, no, you absolutely should not. You should not abandon the other things that you care about. I think there's a sense that if you just sort of stick to your guns and hold to what you believe, that you'll be able to like hold all of these values equally at the same time. But that doesn't actually work in my experience in a complex world. And so doing this kind of pluralistic work, I think doing any nonprofit work, frankly, but especially when you're doing this pluralistic work, your values, your internal values will come into conflict with one another very quickly. And so what does that mean when your internal values are in conflict? Well, for a flippant example, for me, it means that I really value the joy I get from eating salted caramel brownies because those are delicious. I also value fitting in my clothes day to day. It's a true values conflict when I am presented with salted caramel brownies on a regular basis. But more seriously, let's look at a values conflict where there's more emotional stuff involved here. So I'm going to take the example of the AME church. This is just something that comes to mind for me. The AME denomination is the oldest denomination formed in America. It's formed by free Blacks in the 18th century, taking their own agency to support each other when the white Methodist Episcopal churches did not support them. I have a big value for people being able to affect their own agency, to gather and decide what is best for themselves. That's a big value. I also strongly value the work for racial justice and community power building that the AME Church has done and continues to do. And in August of last year, the AME General Conference voted again to disallow same-sex marriage within the church. That violates my value of equality of marriage for same-sex loving couples. If I consider partnering with the AME Church, or if I, for whatever reason, have an opportunity to partner with the AME Church, that puts me in an internal values conflict. What I have seen many, many organizations do in a situation like this is to just back away from whatever organization it was that sort of made that values conflict visible to them. And saying, you know, that violates my values, I can't work with him. But this is the thing, that doesn't actually avoid the conflict. Once a conflict is present, and it's always, I actually always think these conflicts are present. It's once the conflict becomes visible to you, you are going to make a choice one way or the other to prioritize one of your values over the other. And that is going to be true whether you choose to work in this instance with the AME Church because you want to hold allyship to the LGBTQ community. Or that is going to be true if you choose to work with the AME Church because you value the work of racial justice. But to back away from working with the AME Church when you are stating that your work is racial justice would be to abandon one of the most powerful and authentic voices on that issue, violating the value of racial justice. So again, you can't avoid these conflicts. They are there. And just kind of giving the knee-jerk, I can't work with them reaction doesn't mean you haven't made a decision. Instead, what your organization will need to do is to work through the internal value conflict. And there's lots of different ways to do that. It's going to look really different in different types of organizations. Stories Change Power team, if you'll drop in another publication I wrote. This one was for funders. This one was for funders who are considering working with faith-inspired grantees, but it might have some good stuff for you in other situations too. Just sort of thinking through, what is it I value? And what is it about this that worries me? And can we have an open conversation about it? And then also having that in conversation internally. It's going to look different if you're in a very hierarchical organization than if you're in a staff leadership type of organization. But I think it is necessary to do this kind of work. So pretending it is not there it doesn't help you get anywhere. So that's, if you find yourself in one of these situations, you know, I think it's super helpful to engage a third party facilitator. You can call us at Cohesion Strategy, of course, of any number of fabulous facilitators that can help you walk through this stuff. And then I want to bring it all the way back to first full circle, that nonprofit organizations in America, just like all of y'all, are just really navigating so many different diverse and competing visions of the good society while trying to implement your own, right? And that all of those strategies are related to sort of implied visions about who's in or out. So what are the boundaries? And the broader you can make that vision, strategies and communication across races, ideologies, religions, etc., the bigger a we you can create on the issue that you care about, and the more effective your work will be in the long run. So I'm going to stop for there. I know we're almost at time, and we'll have a few questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Allison. I feel like the time flew by, and I have a hunch that maybe some folks got more, like this was a much bigger, you know, huge discussion. This was not a light Friday webinar. So, so thank you everyone for being here and your interest. There was another aha moment I had when you were talking about the, you know, the backing away. That language gave me an image of backing away from this group because we don't agree there, and backing away from this group and we don't agree there, and backing until we're exactly where we are right now, which is so isolated and alone, because no one is, you know, perfect enough, if I can use that, or they just don't fit. And so it goes back to that image you said, of having a society, if it's so brittle, then
Yeah.
we're broken apart from each other. And you'd said at one point too that organizations, and this is a point that folks, especially if you're in a nonprofit, I really want you to hear this. Like, we need to take care that our vision, our strategies, our communications express a deep inclusivity. And that is hard because, and I think there was a mention in the chat of this where folks, and I don't want to pick on either side, but I think having a particular, you must believe this, you must say it this way. And Allison, you just had said this so beautifully, where if people who might join you otherwise feel excluded by your language, that is your loss as an organization, not theirs. And I wonder in the time, and folks, I still, if you've got questions, we want to hear them. And I got a direct message. We'll get to you in the recording or somewhere. We will get an answer to you. So don't be shy with the questions. But can you elaborate a bit on that, Allison, about that inclusivity and how it's the organization that might lose and not the folks who are feeling then excluded?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about, I think my go-to example on this is climate work. So climate change has become, for a variety of reasons, it has become affiliated with the left. The focus on slowing climate change has become affiliated with the left. However, there is a large group of Christians, and again, this is the stuff that I've researched, so this is what I know. This just happens to be what I know. But there's a large group of conservative Catholics and a sizable group of conservative evangelicals who look at the world around them as God's creation, and who look at pollution as a right to life issue because it kills kids and lots of other people, and who are genuinely interested in changing policy in ways that absolutely align with environmental protection and slowing climate change. Same thing with hunters. So gun owners are often hunters, and they are out there, they're spending enormous amounts of time out in the natural world, and they love it. And they don't want to see the lands that they spend so much time in destroyed or polluted. So there's this incredible coalition that could be assembled, but it's very difficult to do that if the climate change folks who are doing the loudest climate change organizing are doing that from a very left centered or left focused orientation, and we all know there's sort of coded language. We use certain types of language. We make some assumptions about who people are and what they care about. And so if we're doing that climate change work with that sort of left oriented mindset, we miss this whole other coalition.
Mm.
We're so divided. It's 50-50 electorate right now. We only need, how many people would you need to peel off? Well, a small percentage to vote for real difference in that policy, right? So it just
Yeah.
feels like it's so close. But
Yeah.
we because of our real human desires to connect our whole vision of the good society, our whole progressive orthodoxy vision of the good society, or our whole conservative orthodox vision of the good society, to the single, we're only going to work with these people, that limits what we can actually get done in the reality of a diverse world.
It looks like we will go just a smidgen past the hour. If folks need to stop off, know that we will share the recording. I've got a question here about psychographic data and studies that's getting beyond the demographic, but about how people think on unexpected groups that can be drawn into our cause. I've got some thoughts on that, Ginger, we will share. I'd love just two more quick things, Allison. One, I'm currently sitting in Texas and had a conversation just yesterday with someone who raises cattle, and it was amazing the different topics that came up about how the economy is impacting his work. And then I think about we talked about climate as well and environment, all of the things. And then for everyone who enjoys a delicious steak or hamburger, we're all connected in that way. So it's interesting to think about the ways we we talk about different issues and how we're impacted in ways that can remember that we're all connected, or in ways that pretend that we're not. So one last question to you. I know we have covered a lot today. If there is one thing that you want people to remember, what is that thing?
If you want to be included, if you want to be included, be inclusive. And I say this from the experience of somebody who I got into this sort of history of justification of violence because I was bullied for being not Christian in a Christian environment.
Mm.
So I know what it feels like to be excluded. And the biggest lesson for me and the biggest joy for me, one of my biggest joys when I was at Aspen was to do religious freedom work, for example, where I made a seat for myself at that table and built that table that invited the folks who would have excluded me if I had given them a chance.
Mm.
But but I had the opportunity to create a table where we were all in it. And that was an amazing, amazing experience. So if you want to be included, be inclusive.
I love that. I love that so much. If you want to be included, be inclusive. Thank you, Allison. I really appreciate all of the wisdom that you've shared today. Thank you, everyone, for joining. This is an ongoing series, and so we will have a May webinar opening for registration soon as well. Be sure that you are checking us out on LinkedIn to follow that. When you leave the webinar, a quick poll will pop up. Please be a helper and take about 15 seconds to fill that out. Your feedback informs other webinars, and we really value that. Thank you. There's still time to register for Storytelling 101. We'd love to see you there. In the meantime, be well, do good, stay happy and hopeful, and have a wonderful weekend. Take care, everyone.